This is the last video that you're going to need to finally fix that slice that has been bothering you. So if you're new to the channel, my name is Bryce Cope. I'm a golf coach and content creator. I've done over 6,000 lessons over the past 2.5, 3 years. And what we're going to do in this video is we are going to deep dive into the top 5 most common things that I see that cause slices for players. So there may be some quick fixes in here, but we are going to go after some more long-term pattern changes to really make sure that you can kind of fix these core issues. You may need to fix one of the things discussed, you may need to fix multiple things discussed, but we are going to go over these top 5 and let's dive into it. So this is going to be a lengthier video. Like I said, we are going to really deep dive into these topics. So I'll put some timestamps down in the description if you need to kind of jump back into this video at some point to go ahead and kind of pick up where you left off, or if you want to revisit a section, you'll be able to see where these start. But the first section that we are going to start with, we're going to get the boring stuff out of the way. This is going to be the setup, and I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 different things within the setup that I see cause the slice for players. And if you go to a coach and you're slicing or hooking the golf ball, whatever it may be, and setup isn't the first thing they adjust, it is doing you a massive disservice. That is going to kind of set the tone for the rest of the swing. So this is probably the most important part of this video. Then we'll actually get into some swing movements on the backswing, downswing, things like that. So piece number 1 that we are going to talk about is your grip. I'm sure you've heard about this one at some point, but you want to make sure your grip is not too weak. And what does that mean? We want to make sure that your lead hand is not rolling too far towards the target and that the trail hand is not rolling too far on top of the grip. When we get into this position, this is typically going to want to roll this club face very open. When the club face is rolled open, usually start line is going to be well right for a right-handed player or left for a left-handed player. So the other issue is the club face can influence your club path. And what I mean by this is if you're hitting a slice, either your face is open and or you're swinging over the top and kind of chopping down on this golf ball. So if I get to a point where my grip is weak and my face is rolled open, which way does this ball want to go? We just talked about it's going to want to go right. So which way is your body going to typically try to swing? If I start to throw this club over the top, this is trying to close the club face, and you can now see I've added a big time over the top move or out to in club path to try to manage this ball and get it to start somewhat on line. So if you get this grip in a very weak position, roll the face open, you're only going to hit that shot, but so many times before you start trying to make some sort of fix, and that's where the club path can be influenced. So if that grip gets weak, face rolls open, I slam it over the top, that's a way to try to give yourself the sensation of the face being closed, and now you've kind of created 2 issues of the face being open, path being over the top, all because of your setup position. So to fix this, what I want you to do is feel like your lead hand is working over top of the grip to the point that you can see about 2.5 knuckles and a good portion of your glove logo here. And we're going to feel like if we're kind of taking this trail hand, we're not reaching over top of the grip to get this on. I want you to feel like if we're looking at this as a clock, this is 12 o'clock, this is 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. I want you to feel like you are bringing that hand in from like 4 or 5 o'clock. Go ahead and get it underneath the side of that grip there, and you should see this crease between the thumb and pointer finger sort of running up that forearm. That is where we can now start to get that face a little bit more square. Now that the face is a little bit more square, even slightly closed, that ball is going to want to go a little more left for a right-handed player. So now that allows me to feel like I actually have the ability to swing a little bit more into out without just hitting a massive, basically flop shot. So that is why the grip is so important. The next piece with your setup is going to be the club face. So if we're sitting here at address and we go ahead and get this grip in a slightly stronger spot, that's great. But if your attachment to the club is in an open position, it's not going to do us a whole lot of good. Meaning if we get in here and we have the face set in an open position, even if I take a slightly stronger grip, that face is still open. So that is where we can run into the same issues we just discussed with the path. So something that you can do is you can take a glove package or some sort of object with a straight edge, and basically I want you to go ahead and get the ball just next to this, and we're going to kind of get this face set up where we know for a fact that this thing is nice and square. We can go ahead and take our slightly stronger grip position, and now we can just sort of slide this club head towards us. We can take a little step back, and you're going to know for a fact that face is now in a square position. So if you're a player that's used to getting this face fairly open, even with that slightly stronger grip, if you set this down and you realize, man, that toe is way off of this packaging, it's not so much getting here and just rolling it square. We need to completely let go of this golf club, square the face up, now go ahead and get that stronger grip on, and that is how we're going to now attach ourselves to that club in a fairly square position. So make sure that your face is not the issue from the start. So point number 3 when it comes to the setup, it is going to be your alignment. So if I get to a point where I'm trying to aim right down this center line of the screen here, if I go and I start aligning myself well over to the right side, the body is going to naturally want to look to the target line without realizing the alignment's off. So point number 3 is going to be your alignment. So if I get in here and I'm trying to aim fairly close to down the center of this line here, but I go and I start getting my alignment a little bit too far over to the right side. So I'm not necessarily saying your alignment is getting closed, where I can still stay fairly square to the target with the club face and get my body alignment slightly closed. This is more so we're getting the face aimed over to the right side, we're getting our feet aimed over to the right side. Subconsciously, you know you're trying to hit this ball down the center. So even if you get your body alignments off, if you get everything over to the right, your eyes are naturally going to look to where you want the ball to go. You're going to look up to that center line. You're not going to look out over this direction. You would never want to hit the ball over there. So if you know subconsciously, I'm trying to hit the ball this way, but I'm aimed well over this way, what is your body likely going to do on the downswing? We're going to throw this club over the top, trying to swing down that target line. So that is where your alignment can start to give you some issues. So this is where if you're on the range to give yourself the kind of sensation of getting lined up properly, this is where I would always recommend you go with the 2 alignment stick setup. We're going to go one just outside the ball. That's going to be sort of our target alignment stick. And then we are going to go one parallel to this. This is going to be our feet alignment stick. And basically we're going to get set up here where we know our feet are nice and square parallel with this closer line. And we know that we are going to be fairly square with this line as well. And that is going to make sure our alignments are getting into a good square position. From here, we're lined up down the center. Much easier to swing down our intended target line, not getting lined up way over here and having to work this club out and over top to try to swing down that line. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense of why that alignment can throw you off a little bit. The last thing that we're going to talk about with this setup is going to be coming from this face-on view. And we're going to talk a little bit about arm positioning and a little bit about your spinal tilts. So I see a lot of slicers of the golf ball get to a point where they will almost get the spine leaning, say my target's down this way, leaning a little bit too far towards the target. So you can see my spine is leaning very forward. This is going to do a couple of things. This is going to typically take my shoulders, it's going to start to flatten them too much, and it can usually start to open the shoulders a little bit. So if I get to a point where I start to tilt and lean forward, it can sort of angle my shoulders over to this side here, and my hands are going to want to typically kind of follow that shoulder line, and that's where we can get the hands working a little too out and across because the shoulders have opened up. So the other thing it can do is it can affect your arm positioning. So if I start to get to a point where I start to lean a little bit more forward, so if I'm in a position where I have some good spinal tilts, we'll talk about how to get here in a second, but if I start to get my spine leaning forward, what's this doing to the back shoulder? We just talked about it's leveling the shoulders out too much, so this back shoulder is going up. So if this back shoulder starts going up, it's getting further away from the golf club. If this is getting further away from the golf club, this is going to make me have to reach for it a little bit more. And what's going to happen to this trail hand? It's going to get too far on top, and we're right back to point number 1 of the grip being too weak. The other issue is it can start to get this lead arm a little bit stuck on side of the pec where my bicep is sort of over on the side of the rib cage here. And now I'm very over top with this trail hand. So now I'm in a spot where my grip is right back to that weaker position. So what I would like you to do is if you kind of hold a club down the center of your chest and you hold it on your belly button, we're going to feel like we bump the hips forward and up slightly as the back shoulder goes back and down slightly. That's going to add some good spinal tilts. That's going to make it easier for the shoulders to stay square. So now my lead shoulder has now gotten a little higher. So now what do I have to do to get to the club? I almost have to get this arm a little more on top of my pec, which makes it a little easier to strengthen the grip. Now that this trail shoulder is a little lower, it makes it a little bit easier for that trail hand to come in at that 4 or 5 o'clock area. And now the grip can get into a stronger position. We can keep those shoulders a little bit more square, and our spinal tilts are in a great place, which is going to really come in handy when we start talking about rotation in a few minutes here. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing and setup on why that upper body positioning is so important. So before you even think about changing your golf swing, I would give that part of the video a rewatch if you have to. Make sure that your setup is ideal. Make sure that you're using video or you're using mirrors, and then that is where we can finally start getting into making some swing tweaks if the setup alone has not fixed it for you. Now let's dive into the golf swing, and the first piece we're going to talk about is your takeaway. So we're going to talk about an inside takeaway, and this is where it is not always a must change if your takeaway is inside, and I'll explain this a little bit. So the move that I do not want to see, and the one that we are going to work on fixing, is getting the club rolling open and inside. This is sort of a death move in the golf swing. I will see some players that will kick the club a little bit inside, but they'll manage to keep this face fairly square where this toe is slightly down. They'll manage the club up well to the top. It may shallow fairly well, and they hit the ball great. So if you are a player where you notice the club gets a little inside the hands, but the face is square and it manages itself well to the top, shallows well, you hit it well, it is not something that I fix in all players. But that rolled inside move, more in particular, is one that I do try to fix. So let's kind of go over why. So if you're working back and you get to a point where, say, we know the setup is neutral, I'm not going to keep saying that, we'll assume we've made those changes, but you like to roll. You like to kind of take your glove logo or your watch face on your lead hand and roll it to the sky. That is going to essentially get us to a point where we are kicking this club face inside and very open. So the open face, we've discussed why that's an issue. But say this club is inside and I continue to go back. This club is in a very flat position. You can see when I get here, this club is sort of pointing well out in front of the golf ball I'm trying to hit. So I'm more than likely not going to get here and just wrap the club around my body forever. I'm going to try to do something to get it vertical. So if I have this club very flat and I start trying to get it vertical, there's different ways you can do this. You can flare the elbow, you can cup the wrist, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes here, but these things can start to stand the club up and help you get it to the top of your backswing. The issue now is momentum. If we start to take a club and we start to stand it up very late in our backswing, up and over in this direction, and I add downswing rotation, I take this momentum plus rotation, that club is going over the top every single time with an open face. That is going to be a disaster to work around. So it's not so much that the inside takeaway is the direct issue, it is sort of the kind of core issue, but it's more so kind of the downstream effect of, because it's inside and flat, it makes us stand it up. Because we're standing it up late with momentum, that leads it to coming over the top. So we have to kind of work our way back, get to that core issue of fixing the takeaway first. So a few checkpoints. If you look at extremely high level players, you're going to see a lot of them have this club somewhere around the hands when it's parallel to the ground with the toe slightly down. You're going to see when they get to about chest high, the hands are going to be about in line with the back armpit, with the end of this club pointing inside the golf ball. So what this does is this starts to load the club a little bit more vertically early, so it has room to then flatten late, right? If we flatten early, we have nowhere to go but vertical late, so it's the exact opposite. So we're trying to work a little bit more of this move in so this club can start to fall to the inside, and that can fix the club path. So one of my favorite drills for this is if you go ahead and take an alignment stick, we're just going to run this down the front side of the shaft. We're going to get it sort of ran in this position. So if I'm going to take my grip as normal as I can, and if I go ahead and I start to roll, if I start to roll this club this way, like we took a look at, you're going to see that this alignment stick is going to be pointing well over in this direction. If I go and I start to roll the club inside and continue to the top, you can see very flat position. Even if my hands are in line with my armpit, this alignment stick isn't too flat of a spot here. So now all I can do is stand it up late, and you can see the stick is now very vertical on the way down. We need to flip-flop that. So what you're going to feel is as you work back, we are going to feel like we keep the hands slightly down and inside, a little bit of wrist hinge, so I have plenty of videos on that if you are curious about how to hinge the wrists a little bit more efficiently. But if we are working back and we keep these hands inside and add some wrist hinge, you can see this alignment stick now is staying on my front thigh, sort of running down the front thigh there. Take a look at it from this view. You're going to see alignment stick is staying on the thigh, not rolling well to the outside. So that is allowing you to start loading that club vertically. So now as you start working back, what your next checkpoint is going to be is when you get the hands to chest high in line with the back armpit, this alignment stick needs to point inside of this golf ball. So from there, we can feel down the thigh, alignment stick is pointing inside the golf ball, up to the top. Now your feel is going to be, get the alignment stick in front of the golf ball. We've completely reversed that pattern. And start really slow with this. I wouldn't recommend you go straight to hitting balls. I don't want you to start whacking yourself in the side with the alignment stick there on that front side, but we're gonna feel alignment stick on the thigh, alignment stick loads vertically, up to the top, alignment stick points outside of the golf ball, and that is going to be a good way to give you that feeling or that sensation of almost creating a little bit of loopiness in the swing. The hands are not pushing out, it's more so the club is just loading itself a little more up and a little bit more down. One feel, if you don't love the alignment stick idea, is you can think about what your thumbs are doing. If you're getting to a point you roll, you can see your thumbs are very flat pointing behind you. You can see on the way down, your thumbs are pointing up a little bit more towards the ceiling or to the sky. I want you to feel like at chest high, your thumbs are to the ceiling, and on the way down, your thumbs are pointing to a wall back behind you, and that can give you that, again, that sensation of that club getting a little loopier, and that can start to loop that club a little bit more to the inside. And that's where you should start to straighten that ball flight out a little bit, where that club path is getting a little closer to about 1 degree into outer, so hopefully much better than being well over the top like it may currently be at the moment. So the second thing we're going to talk about in this swing, while we are on the topic of kind of the forearms and the wrist, is we are going to talk a little bit about the lead wrist structure. So this is where, if we are looking at the lead wrist, typically as we start to cup, or just in case you ever come across the term, extend the lead wrist, this is something that usually wants to steepen the club and open the club face. You can see that toe is twisting a little bit more down towards the ground there. And typically as that wrist cups, it makes me want to get a little steeper. But as I get up to the top, if I start to almost bow, or what's going to be referred to as flex that lead wrist, that's going to want to close the club face, where you can see the face sort of hoods itself up towards the sky and can help us get a little bit more shallow. So with everything you watch, as you know, big advocate of getting the setup dialed in. But if you want a 2-for-1, if you're a player that comes over the top and you have an open face and you slice the golf ball, if you want one fix, this is probably going to be the one. It may be a little bit more of a band-aid or a quick fix depending on the player. It may be the perfect long-term fix depending on the player. But this is going to typically accomplish both things, where it's going to fix our path and our club face. Where if you're a player that goes and plays once or twice a month and you're not playing a ton and you're just like, man, give me something to get the face shut and not feel like I'm chopping over the top, this would probably be the section to kind of put the most emphasis on for you. So what we're going to talk about is the timing of this. We kind of just talked about the takeaway. So if I get to a point that I'm rolling this club to the inside, a lot of times as I start to roll, this lead wrist wants to cup. So we sort of just solved that with that initial takeaway drill. Whereas we're working back and we're feeling like we're setting the wrist a little bit, I want you to make sure that that lead wrist is nice and flat, or even a little bit bowed. So again, the timing matters though. So say you nail this position off the takeaway, that doesn't mean you're not going to undo it as you work up to the top and we now go right back into a cup position. So that's where you need to really make sure, if you nail the takeaway, you almost feel like this wrist as you work up is adding even more bowing if you tend to cup, and really exaggerate maintaining at worst that position as you work up to the top here. And that should get us to a pretty good spot versus letting the wrist start to cup here. So the kind of last option with this is, if you are getting to a great spot at the top, you can cup on the way down, right? So just because we can kind of nail the backswing doesn't mean that we're going to maintain or that we're going to keep it. So if I go really good takeaway, really nice wrist structure at the top, but I cup on the way down and I lose those angles, it was kind of all for nothing. So that's where you can almost feel like you're trying to kind of roll your knuckles down towards the ground. Or if I had a glove logo on, almost trying to point that glove logo or the back of my hand back at you, back through the computer screen here, the phone screen. That is where we are going to start to see that club start to drop behind and the face start to close. So give yourself some time to hit some real slow shots. If you notice that you really struggle with the takeaway, really give yourself some time to work on some pause reps where we kind of feel like we nail this position up to the top until we start hitting some shots that come out fairly straight. If you notice that you get to a really good position off the start, but it's up to the top that you struggle, you may need to kind of nail this position, really exaggerate bowing that wrist to the top, go ahead and work down until you start getting that ball to come out a little left. Didn't pick it up there, but that start line looked fairly left on that one. And if you're a player that really gets this club in a good spot off the start, you really nail your backswing position, but you cup on the way down, I would give yourself plenty of time working on real slow reps where you kind of nail the top of backswing position, really exaggerate bowing that lead wrist so the club falls behind you, face closes, until we can start hitting this ball that starts to come out a little further left. And your goal is honestly to start hitting some hooks. I want you to feel like as you kind of ramp the speed up, we're nailing the top position, bow the wrist, until we start getting some shots that start coming out like this, where we start getting some in-to-out club paths and some closed face angles. That's how you know that you would be doing that correctly. So the lead wrist bowing is a very, very crucial one if you slice it, but the timing can matter, and that can be a little different for everybody. Moving on, we are going to dive into point number 4, and this is going to be my personal favorite and the one that I have seen transform golf swings probably more than any other feel or tip or concept. So when we're looking at point number 4, what we're going to get into is something that is referred to as hand depth. And essentially what hand depth is where are my hands in space. If you are a player that tends to come over the top, you may notice your hands get a little high and a little out in front of you. Where if I were to draw a line straight down from the end of the grip, you may see that line ends up a little bit more over the toes. If you are a player that has a lot more depth, you look at a player like Rory, he is going to have the hands much further back and behind, much more over towards the heel if we drop that line straight down from the grip. And typically what happens is as we get the arms further behind us, the club wants to drop more to the inside. As we get our arms a little bit more lifted and a little bit more high, this is where we can start to swing a little bit more over the top. So if you're a player that struggles with shallowing the golf club, getting the hands further behind you on the backswing is almost a cheat code to get that club to fall to the inside on the downswing. So this is where the way that we go about doing this is different for everybody. But the main kind of issue that I will see is poor rotation. Rotation is going to be the number one issue that I'll see here. Where if I'm a player that just does not move the body very well, the arms are going to have a hard time getting behind me. So my arm structure may not be too bad, but it's just that I haven't rotated. But as soon as I add a little bit of turn, my arms naturally go more behind me. Club can shallow, we don't have to do anything with the arms. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to really give you kind of 2 drills to work on the rotation, but this is where we're going to kind of call back to the setup portion of this, where if I get in a spot where my spine is leaning very forward, that makes it very hard to rotate. That is why getting those spinal tilts in order is so important, because it makes it much easier to rotate during the backswing, which as you can see, gets the arms more behind you. So one drill that I'm going to give you is going to be take an alignment stick, and we are going to get this thing right on the inside of the back foot. So we're going to set up alignment stick's going to be on the inside of the back heel. We can go ahead and get a club up across the shoulders. So if you're a player that struggles to rotate and we just don't really turn, you can see that this club does not get over this alignment stick on my back foot. Your goal is to feel like we're getting front shoulder to turn over the back foot while keeping the head fairly centered. I don't want you getting way off the ball and swaying a ton, but we're going to feel like we are adding a good amount of turn. And as soon as we start to do that, the hands are naturally going to go more behind, which will naturally let that club fall to the inside. So the hips are also something we have to look at, where the rotation is sort of an upstream event. So if you get to a point where your hips don't turn, it makes it very hard for the upper body to turn. But as the hips turn a little more, the upper body is going to be unlocked and can start to turn a little further. So this is where we're going to have a talk about reverse pivoting. This is another very common issue that I will see, is as players will work back, they'll almost get the back hip sliding up and away from the target. That is going to make it very hard to rotate, and the upper body will stay very lean forward. So you hear all the time you want the hips to start the downswing. But if I'm in a position where my hips slide up and away from me and my upper body leans forward, my hips are so far back and my upper body is so far forward, I'm going to lunge. You can see my upper body is leading the way, and that is a recipe for tossing this club over the top. So even if you do manage to somehow create some decent depth from here, if you spin out with the chest, the club is going over the top, and that is again why those tilts are so important. It gets our hip a little higher and a little more forward, our upper body back, and it helps avoid this position. So my favorite drill for this is going to be, you can throw a club over the shoulders or you can throw this thing down. Let's get an alignment stick or a club in the center of the stance. We're going to cross our arms over our shoulders, and your goal is going to be, I want you to get your front shoulder behind this alignment stick while we're getting the back glute in front of it. So what this will look like if we do it wrong is something like this. Back hip has stayed on back of the stick, front shoulder has stayed on the front of the stick. We're going to get into that spinal tilt position, and we are going to feel front shoulder gets behind as this hip works around, almost like I'm trying to show my back glute to the target a little bit more by turning a little bit further. And that is where, as that hip works around and the shoulder works behind, that is going to allow me to turn and coil significantly more. But when you look at just about every single high-level player, you're going to see at the top of backswing, the hips are a little more forward, the upper body is a little bit more back. That is where we are in a position for those hips to start leading the way. And as we do that, that is where this club can start to fall to the inside and shallow. The timing of it and pressure shifting and things like that, there are some other kind of subtle nuances that are important, but you just need to get that overall concept, and then we can kind of tweak those pressures in the future if needed. But that reverse pivot or just lack of rotation is by far the most common thing that I will see cause a slice in players. So say you get that dialed in, say your rotation gets to a much better spot, you're turning the body better, but you still have a tendency to feel like your arms are lifting and you're still getting a little steep. That is where you can go after the arms themselves. And what you can do you can take a glove and we can go ahead and kind of throw it in this back armpit here. So if I get to a point where I get set up nicely, I'd make a nice big turn, but I really like to lift and disconnect with my arms. Even though I've turned well, my arms have just lifted too high, that glove is going to fall out. So this can be a nice way to keep some good connection where we get a glove up under the armpit. We feel like we go ahead and make a nice big turn while keeping that glove in there. The hands should work a little more around the body, and that should be a good way to implement a little bit more of a draw pattern and naturally let the club fall to the inside. But what I don't want you to do is think, okay, my arms need to get a little bit further behind me, so I'm just going to start ripping it to the inside and getting my arms around, because now you can see we're right back to that flat and inside takeaway. So we can still nail that takeaway position, and from here make that nice big turn with the glove under the back armpit, and that is going to make sure you add some good depth to the swing, which, like I said, is basically a cheat code to getting that club to shallow out and fall a little bit more to the inside for you. Now, the last thing we are going to discuss is going to be a few feels and drills for the downswing. So as I'm sure you can kind of get the gist of by now, or the idea of by now, is I'm a huge fan of getting the setup dialed in, getting the backswing dialed in, because that pretty much just puts us in a position for things to almost happen automatically. If we can set those things up and get ourselves to a good functional position at the top, usually the downswing sort of figures itself out. And if we're in a poor position, the downswing is just a bunch of compensations, and there's no point of going after it because we just have to fix what's going on before, which we just talked about in those last 4 sections. But say you are one of those players that gets the club into a really good position at the top, your setup's beautiful, you nail that takeaway, you get some nice depth of the hands, wrist structure looks good, but you just like to get these hands working a little out. This is where we're going to talk about a few feels to help this. So if we are looking at the downswing and you want a drill to help get this club a little more to the inside, one of my favorite is to get an alignment stick, and we are going to get this adjusted so you give yourself, we'll call it what, around like 6 inches or so above this golf ball, where the ball is pretty much right underneath of this alignment stick. So I like to get the stick angled out a little bit over in this direction. You will see some coaches that will recommend we get it directly behind the ball and lift it to get it up a little bit higher, which I think is a fine setup. However, this is where with slicers, what I worry about is, especially if you have a tendency to get the club wrapping too far to the inside, if we get an alignment stick in here, even if it's up a little bit higher, everybody gets nervous about hitting it, so they really end up getting this club wrapping well out and away. So I find that as we get it a little bit lower, but we kick it out to the side just a little bit, it can get it out of the way just enough off the start that you don't feel like you have to completely compromise your takeaway to get this club kind of working back. We feel like we can kind of nail this position. So the whole point of this, as I'm sure you know, we can kind of figure out, is we are not going to drive the hands out, get the shaft steep, and start getting the club outside where we're going to hit the stick. We are going to need to feel like the club falls to the inside of this. So this is where we're not going to get too mechanical. I think some athletic instincts will kick in, and you naturally will keep those hands a little bit closer to make sure that we don't lunge over the top. Give yourself some time to just start real slow. Work your way up to the top and just feel like we work a little bit more to the inside of that until you feel like you're not lunging and coming up over the top. The one thing that I do want to talk about, though, is you may have seen, like Justin Rose is a great example of kind of feeling like the arms are lowering. He does a great job of kind of talking about this in videos, where he feels like he's one of those players that gets to a great position at the top, but spins out with the chest a little quick and the hands kick a little too far out in front. So you may see these drastic or kind of dramatic rehearsals where his body doesn't move, but he feels like he lowers the arms, and then he can go ahead and swing from the inside and not get too out in front of himself. So kind of up to the top, freeze, arms lower, then we go ahead and turn. I love the feel. However, the one thing that I will see players start messing up with this is they will feel like they need to start pulling down on the grip to get the club to lower. And what can happen, this is kind of classic, there's the old Sergio Garcia video of pulling on the chain or pulling on the rope. Not a bad feel for him, but the way I see a lot of amateur players implement it, they don't do correctly, because what they end up doing is they get to the top and they pull, which really starts to narrow the angle between the forearm and the shaft. And if I start to break my wrist angles down and I start to yank and pull, the club gets steep, lead wrist is going to typically cup. So rather than thinking of it as a pulling down move, I want you to think of it as lead wrist needs to stay nice and flat as we lower this club behind us, not aggressively yank. So that is kind of the one thing to watch as you do these type of drills. Get up to your good neutral position, lead wrist stays flat as we lower the club down to about waist high. Go ahead, work down until you can swing under the stick, and that is going to be a great way to get those arms to work a little more downward in transition if you have a tendency of spinning out of the shot and kind of getting those hands to fire a little too far out and in front of yourself. Guys, I cannot thank you enough for watching if you made it through that entire video. Going to get more and more instructional videos up on this channel, and I also have the Club Champion series where I go play really high-level players at their home courses. There's been some great matches there, and we'll keep on getting content out. Going to try to do a similar style video for players that hook the golf ball too, so if you know somebody that hooks it too much, tell them to be on the lookout. But again, cannot say thank you enough. If you would like and subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated as this channel continues to grow. Online lessons, I'll put the link down in the description here as well if you're interested in working together through the off season or the in season, depending on when you're watching this video. But any questions, please drop them below. More than happy to answer anything, and I will see you guys next time. Later.